I would appreciate it. So I think while we left off, we were going to look at, we were talking about Daniel in Daniel 7, and about how he removes kings and appoints kings and gives wisdom to the wise men and knowledge to people of understanding. And so, and then I had made the point that as we kind of see what's happening there in chapter 4, John would recognize this scene because he was familiar with Daniel 7. Because in that Daniel 7 is a throne scene just like we're seeing here. And I just want you to recognize that we're trying to see this through first century eyes. We're not saying this is, just to be clear, we're not saying this is what Jews believe. We're saying Jews believed in the Old Testament. Jews believed this throne. John is a Jew. He's seeing this. He recognizes it from the Old Testament. So we're going to look at Daniel 7 real quick, just a little bit of it. So in verse 9, it says, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened." Of course, there was no such thing as books back then. They were scrolls. But you see, it says the court sat in judgment. And as I talked about last week, we're seeing this revelation as a courtroom motif theme. So if you remember when we read chapter 1, when Eric was doing chapter 1, there's the same kind of description to it, but we're going to look at Daniel as we move down into Daniel 13. And then Daniel says, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man." We all know this is Jesus. "And he came to the Ancient of Days," which is the Father, "and he was presented before him. And to him," that's Jesus, "was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." So I just kind of want you, this is what John, when Jesus has given him the vision, this is what John is seeing basically. And he would remember, oh yeah, Daniel, I remember that. He told us to, because remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24? Go look at Daniel. When he's talking about the Olivet Discourse.
This is what, 500 years?
Yeah, 500 years before, yeah.
Before.
That's right. Yeah. So we've established that John would have recognized the scene and would have thought about Daniel 7. In fact, scholars have noticed there's 14 matching points between Daniel 7 and Revelation 4 and 5. We're not going to go over those 14 points. But we will talk about the 24 elders and who they are and can they be identified. So feel free to jump in, ask questions, and we'll discuss it a little bit. But just so we're clear, we're not really told specifically who they are, but we can infer and kind of deduce based on some scriptural evidence. So let's look at some choices here. So the identity of the 24 elders in the book of Revelation is a topic of debate among scholars and theologians and church people. And there are these five I've listed out. These are your main interpretations that most people will go to. The first one is they're the saints. The elders represent the church, which will be praising God in heaven after being raptured. The second one is there's 12 tribes of Israel, and there's 12 apostles, and so this must represent the unity of the old and new covenants in Christ. There's a lot of people that believe this one. Then you have one that is called the 24 Patriarchs. The elders may be the 24 patriarchs whose names are listed in the book of Genesis. And I find that one a little more interesting. And then you have, of course, the angels. These elders may be heavenly council, angelic beings. And then lastly, you have, it's the divine council members. So if you look at the 12 tribes, and I know Eric wants to talk a little bit about this too, but the elders may represent the unity in the old and new covenants as we talked about. Anyone want to comment on the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles and being in it?
That's kind of what I've always heard, was it was 12 from the old and 12 from the new.
Yeah, and again, this is probably the most popular
Yeah.
view.
Just to comment, I mean,
Yeah,
if this
that's what
is
I'm looking
true, if this is true, John is seeing himself in the future.
Yeah.
Is John seeing himself in the
Oh,
future?
that's an
He is
interesting
seeing
point.
himself in the future, because he's one of the 12.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Interesting point.
I'm not saying that negates it,
No,
I'm just
I mean,
pointing that out.
John is, look, I think it's clear,
That's a,
even in Daniel
That's a good
7, John is, in Daniel, they're seeing the future.
Yeah.
This is a future
Did he recognize himself?
invention.
Probably.
Did it say?
Hey, that's me.
Did you read that anywhere?
No, I didn't read it anywhere, but I mean, that's what I wonder, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, that's me.
Yeah. Hey, that's me over there.
That's me.
Yeah.
I'm one of them.
future.
At 33 years old.
The only thing I would say about it, and me and Michael, like he was saying, we had a conversation about this, texting back and forth. And the only thing I'm going to say is, I tend to lean towards the idea that they are men. Not necessarily the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, even though I kind of lean that way, but just generally that they are men or saints, because if I remember correctly, Revelation specifically says that they wear golden crowns on their head. This is New Testament, so it's written in Greek. And one of the points that I kind of seize upon is the Greek word for crown refers to the specific crown that the Greeks used to give champions in their games. So those leafy tiara crown things that they wore on their head like the Caesar would wear. And it was a specific crown that was given when you win a competition. This sporting language is one of the things that we've talked about before, is very common in the New Testament. And it's the idea of somebody that has competed in a competition and won. Well, we see that language when Paul is getting ready to give his life in Rome. He says, I have fought the good fight, I have ran the race, and I have finished. There's that sporting language there. And when you finish the race and you win, you get a crown from the Greek council, whatever. So I kind of see that here. And if that's true, then that would lead me to believe that whoever they are that's sitting on these thrones are men. They used to be alive. They put their faith in God, in Christ, in the future specifically. And they won the race. They ran the race. They lived their life. They won. And they're in heaven now, and God has given them a victor's crown. I kind of lean that way. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but that's kind of what I see.
Ken, did you have a comment?
Yeah. I don't know if it's correct or not, but I kind of see this people trying to make a connection between Jesus telling the apostles, you're going to sit on the 12 thrones and judge the 12 tribes, and the idea of this council. And I don't think those are the same thing. I think Eric's right, these are men, but I lean towards these being the 24 patriarchs from Genesis, because my understanding of what I think about the apostles, they're sitting on the 12 thrones at the temple
Right.
in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
They're not in heaven sitting on those thrones. So these are two separate things that aren't really connected.
Who are the 24 patriarchs? Are they the ones in the genealogies, the fathers of the different?
Just hold on. So,
Does that make some sense what I just said?
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think they're
No.
men.
Okay, sorry.
And the reason I don't think they're men is even though what Eric described as the crowns, remember this vision is taking place at the beginning of the tribulation. The crowns are not given to men until at the great white throne of judgment. And then they can cast it before God. These are, we're all speculating here. No one has the right answer. I'm just giving you my speculation. And based on what based on my understanding of some different scriptures and stuff. So I do it from that standpoint. I think they're more of the divine counsel of God that we saw. That's why I had you guys, that assignment that I passed out a couple weeks ago, had you read different things like 1 Kings 22 and looking at how and then in Daniel 4, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, which we discussed last week, about how the watchers decreed. The watchers is another term in Aramaic in Daniel for the sons of God. So that's the reason I have
I like that idea because I think maybe the 24 elders have probably been there since the beginning. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and we don't know how many. I mean, I'm sure well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's thousands or millions of these beings or whatever.
Because there's
Just
no
like
beginning
angels.
of God, and
So anyway, moving forward a little bit here. But even if they are the 12 tribes, and here's the other thing I want to say about this point here, is you have 12 tribes of Israel and 12 apostles, which people are trying to say they connect the old and the new covenants. But one thing, we're not going to have time to get into it today, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Some of you guys know this from Wednesday we've talked about it, is the new covenant is clearly taught in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 31, and the new covenant will not be complete and fulfilled until the second coming, when that change of heart actually takes place at the resurrection. So this goes back to the patriarchs that we were talking about, and then you can find it in First Chronicles. I find this an interesting one. I don't think it's the correct view, but again, this is what people speculate about different things, because the number 24 here is mentioned at the very bottom there, verse 18, goes through this whole list of different people, and then the 24th, these are all patriarch elders and stuff. So just an interesting thought. And then, as we've said before, some people believe they're angels, angelic beings. Some people believe they're part of the divine council. That's where I would fall in. Most theologians eliminate angels because by chapter 5, verse 11, they're separated from the elders as distinct. And I agree with that. They are distinct in that sense. But, it is what it is right here.
I have a thought.
Yeah.
I used to sort of think that it was like the 12 tribes and 12, because it seemed an easy fit,
Yeah, sure.
Easy fit.
Yeah.
But maybe just going through Revelations like 2 and 3, in the context of Revelation 2 and 3, Church chapter 4 talks about, in 2 and 3 talks about their be clothed in white. They say, I think he tells the Laodiceans, do not let them steal your crown.
Right.
So the imagery to the churches in Turkey, whatever, Asia Minor, there's imagery of crown and white robe are already there. So I feel like they're believers.
Yeah.
Well, like Stephen, where he was martyred and then you see that God stood up, and he prayed that prayer, forgive them for they know what they do, and he was stoned to death. These could be special martyrs that died for Christ.
Correct. But I've always thought 12 and 12 makes 24. So, and of course, I always thought it because
Could be 2 dozen eggs.
2 dozen eggs, and then in the city of Jerusalem, it says the foundations have the 12 apostles' names written on the stones. or
On the
something.
gates, yeah. In
something.
Revelation 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's why I was saying at the beginning here that theologians and scholars have wrestled with this, looking at original, Hebrew and Greek and comparing it to other Jewish writings in the what they call the Second Temple period, trying to, figure out. And so I'm just bringing it up as something to discuss. There's no right or wrong answers. Everyone's going to have their opinion, and that's what we're here to do, is not just have some doctrine taught to you and say this is how it is. I'm not saying that at all. So that's what we're doing here.
We really won't know until we get there.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you one thing, it'd be perfect.
Yeah.
We'll go.
Because it also may be none of these.
Very true.
Makes perfect sense.
So one interesting scripture, though, to finish this up, is in Isaiah 24. This is the next page right here. So on that day, which is the day of the Lord, the 1,000 years when He comes back, the Lord will punish the host of heaven. In heaven, in the king. So He's not only going to punish the host of heaven, He's also going to punish the kings of the earth on earth. And then they will be gathered together as prisoners in a pit, and they will be shut up in a prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion, and in Jerusalem, and in His glory will be before His elders. Again, they're not quite sure what this means, but it's the word elders. It's interesting. So I just thought I'd share it.
And then it reminds
The
me.
definition of elders.
Yeah.
It makes me think of binding fallen angels,
Yeah.
which
Oh, for sure.
eventually
Yeah.
they'll be released
Yeah.
after the. It's just sort of like that.
Yep. The prisoners in the pit, we'll get to that pit in a few chapters pretty quick. So, but this stuff is all over the Old Testament, and that's the whole point of kind of going through Revelation, is not to teach what the popular the prophecy teachers teach, because what we want to do is we want to see what does the Old Testament say, because it's my opinion and many scholars' opinion that the Old Testament, the New Testament is basically commenting, trying to explain what the Old Testament says in these things in regard. So you really can't understand, especially Revelation, because it's written in a Jewish apocalyptic literature style. And so Gentiles come along and they become members of the church, and they need to be taught these things because it's not something in their pagan culture they would understand or know.
So it says, when it says punish the host of heaven,
Yeah.
that's the fallen angels and Satan?
Well, I know we have had many discussions in here, Daniel. We believe that some of us in here believe that the host of heavens are like Genesis 6 and the sons of God. They're one and the same.
Right.
They're not angels. That's a different class of beings, if you will. So it's a
But
thing.
when you just look at that, it said the Lord will punish the host of heaven,
Yeah.
and the host of heavens was the angels and the cherubims and Satan that fell. Who else would he be punishing?
Well, it would be a much longer discussion, which we've done here, which we've done in this class many times, and I'm sure we will, but today's not going to be one of them.
When you say he's,
So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, Eric.
you're talking about angels, I think angelic beings would be a good,
Or whatever,
I understand what you're saying and I agree with you.
Yeah. But anyway.
Because a lot of people, there's a lot of people in churches that don't believe that the sons of God are angels. And that angels are not sons of God. They're two different class. And there's a multitude of reasons why that is, but again, that's not what we're here to go over. All right, moving on. So Revelation 4 and 5, so from the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. Before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there as it were a sea of glass like crystal. So if you know your Old Testament, and especially the Exodus story, this should bring the reader back to Mount Sinai in Exodus 19. On the morning of the 3rd day, there's that motif again of the 3rd day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. You see how that relates with the trumpet? And so that all the people in the camp trembled. The main point in these things emanate, they come from God, from God's throne. And so we connect the same description to God's sanctuary, which is the temple in Revelation 11, and to his coming judgments, which we'll see that later. And then we have the description of the 4 living creatures around the throne. And we talked a little bit about this when we did an Ezekiel study. I forget how long ago it was, a year and a half, whatever it was, 2 years. We have 4 living creatures like a lion, calf, man, eagle, all having wings, full of eyes, and they do not cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come. So this phrase, Maranatha, you can actually, the whole underlying thing is a Maranatha phrase, just so you know. But the actual word is not used here, but the actual word is used in 1 Corinthians 16, as I've got listed below. No, I don't have it listed below. Anyway, so verse 10, as for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion. On the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox. And on the left side, the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. This is from Ezekiel 1, which we've talked about. And of course, if you lay down the comparison and look at these, there are a little bit of difference. But it is clearly, my point is, it is clearly the same 4 living creatures, and to demonstrate the Jewishness of the material. So the 4 living creatures, they seem to be a representation of the created order. You have 4, which is often used for the earth, north, south, east, and west. But then you have the ox, the eagle, and the man, the lion, which really represent classes of created animals. So you have flying animals like the eagles, domesticated animals like the ox, wild animals like the lion, then obviously, and humans as the crowning achievement of God. So this is part of what Dr. Alan Bandy believes the 4 living creatures represents of this created order. I think it makes a lot of sense. Again, we're talking, we're discussing, I'm not saying this is exactly what it is, we'll know when we get there. But I thought that was a good interpretation of what it might be. Anybody have a comment?
Makes sense to me.
I wonder if the animals might represent civilizations at the time too. So I know the eagle could be Rome and the lion could be Persia. Not sure who the ox would be though. So.
In Daniel 7, they're described just a little bit different. In Daniel 7, there's a little difference in how he describes the 4 beasts.
These are good creatures, right?
Yes. What'd you say, Jeff?
These are good creatures.
Oh yeah, very good creature.
Yes.
For sure.
Holy.
You know, even though I mean, I've heard so many theories on this topic. You know, I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole, but it's interesting how and I don't know if they got the symbology from this, but the 4 gospel writers are all classified. Luke is the ox, I believe. If you look at church history, look at statues, and you'll see with the four gospel writers, you'll see each of these four animals. A lion represents, maybe it was Matthew. Luke was, I think, man, or maybe Mark. But each, you can go down to any cemetery going here on 104th, and you look at those statues. It's got each of those four animals representing each of the four gospel writers. So I've heard people say it's talking about the gospel and everything. I mean, it's just so many things.
Yeah.
I mean, so many.
It's just very abstract imagery.
With very little explanation, or
Yes.
none.
Yeah.
So, you could read about the same creatures. They're in Isaiah 6 also. They're called seraphim, though there's no real description really given there other than the wings. And those wings differ. There's between 4 and 6 of Ezekiel and that sort of thing. But again, the point is they are the same creatures. Daniel does not describe these creatures in Daniel 7, but Ezekiel does also in chapter 10. And if you recall, when Ezekiel studied called the cherubim, they're throne guards. These beings have a critical part in Revelation, as we will see as we move through the book. Did you have a question?
No, I got a deal on the, maybe the little difference that you see. Same way in the Gospels where you see Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when they talk about a certain parable and everything, it's different points of view.
Exactly.
They're looking from their eyes, what God has shown them, so there's different view. Like if we, in this classroom, we talked about this classroom, you might mention something, and I might mention something different, but it's all the same thing.
Exactly. Whether it's Daniel or Revelations, it's all saying the same thing.
They're about,
Yeah.
they're coming to the conclusion that they're looking from different eyes
Yeah.
and from different angles.
Yeah, I mean, but people who don't believe the Bible get really super caught up in, well, it didn't have that many wings over here in that one. Shut up.
Right. That's just silly. That is.
It's
like
your
they say-
excuse for not believing.
Yeah.
Right, or they say
That's-
they have eyes all over them.
I-
It just means they can see all things. That's all.
Makes
It
it
is.
even more believable. You didn't know when have their stories straight. You know what I mean?
If they, all the stories are taken, would it not be contradicted?
We would
You
think.
go into the courtroom and
Yeah.
every witness's story is the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
word,
Exactly.
identical.
Right.
Well, and it's trying to express something that's spiritual in physical terms.
Yeah.
So
So are these creatures both called seraphim and cherubim?
I think they're two different creatures.
Well,
Isaiah tells you about that starting in 6.
Or two,
So
two
there's-
classes of the same
Yeah.
creature, maybe. So.
I'm not really sure about that because they're both defined as you have like the 4 throne guards, and then you have the ones that are carrying the ark, the throne, which we're going to see a picture of that we did back when we did Ezekiel here in a second. So remember this picture?
Yeah, I love that.
And so if you look down at the very, very, very bottom, right in the middle, that's supposed to be Daniel, or Ezekiel, seeing that.
Wow.
I love
So,
that.
it's an artist render, we don't
The,
know. But again, we have the rainbow thing over the throne that's described in Revelation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On the seraphim and cherubim, are those classes of beings or are they titles of duties or responsibility? Titles.
I think they're classes of being. But,
I've always thought of them as
yeah.
Right. Like we said, cherubim and seraphim.
You have to have a good voice.
So as I say here on this, I think this is the last slide maybe, don't get hung up on all these descriptions of these creatures. If God can make a donkey talk, create weird looking creatures at the bottom of the sea, and create galaxies and planets we can see, it's clearly possible these 4 living creatures are a special creation for the throne room. So Revelation 4, 9 through 11 the remainder of the chapter, the living creatures and the elders worshiping before the throne, singing, "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created."
I mean, I always thought that the angels in Revelations, like in the throne room, or in Ezekiel, or seeing where else, were always the same beings.
Yeah.
And just, he described it a little bit differently than this guy, but that's their, to me, I always thought that was their job. They don't go out and do anything else. They're there before the throne, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, singing praises to God for all eternity. That's what they do.
Yeah, so just as a little bit of difference, the cherubims, you guys will remember from Genesis, they're the ones who guarded the entrance into Eden when they got, Adam and Eve got kicked out. So they're there with flaming swords, so they're kind of guarding the throne room. I think for me, that's the difference between them and the other ones who actually are carrying the throne, if you will. So
When they fly, they have to cover their feet and cover their eyes and 2 wings they fly with.
I don't remember the exact description, but yeah, something like that.
Covering the eyes, as you're saying, they're covering from God's all of His glory.
All right, holiness.
It's the holiness of God.
It'll burn you up like the rays of the lost ark.
They're not looked directly.
Right.
More powerful than all the sins put together. And this is one with the.
All right, so that's the end of the slideshow for today. Unless you guys have any comments, I'm keeping within the time. I'm trying to keep it in 9:45 to 9:50. So
I didn't learn anything today.
He didn't learn anything.
oh, okay, yeah.
Well,
Well, as David D used to say, if you read your Bible,
Well, I think it's good. It's sort of setting the stage.
Well, it's
I think you're setting the stage for what's about to happen
yeah,
next.
we
This
are.
is
Yeah,
what's
because
going. We're describing what's going on. I mean, what we're seeing. We're going through that right now because
Yeah,
what's
so-
about to happen.
right now,
will give us more
John's
understanding.
John's been taken up here and kind of like, look, this is what's getting ready to happen. I'm showing you this. Here's the scroll from Daniel 7. The Father's going to give it to him. He's worthy to open it. And then, all hell's going to break loose, so to speak.
And what I think, though, I don't try to get too caught up on what they are, or who they are, what they
Yeah.
are, because it's really about what's about to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about Christ being given, like you said last week. No one can do this. We're helpless without you, Christ. And so it's about to me, it's about sort of like setting the stage for Christ being exalted and then showing His judgments. And here we go. Like you said, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. This has been helpful for me too, because it's like Clarence said, we won't know until we get there. But it's good for me personally to know that, hey, I always think, is there something I'm missing here? Don't I understand what these creatures represent? And just to have this discussion and know that, well,
Look,
it's really still a mystery. Everybody's still debating it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The
It's good for me to know that I haven't just missed the point. All these, like, oh, stupid Brent.
That's not what you just came out.
Right.
It's supposed to motivate you into doing something.
That's right.
We're not called to
And
stay
the points,
idle.
like, say what you just said, not,
What did I say?
what are they? It's about what's getting ready
That
to
is
happen.
to give
not-
us stronger
Oh, it's just
and hope.
I mean, it's all about the exaltation of Christ.
Right,
Because
yeah.
it's what's about to happen. We're just looking at what we're doing is
What the
breaking down what
creatures
we
are, like
see.
that.
Right.
getting excited,
That's interesting to study. I like that.
Yeah.
But it's about what's about to happen when He gets the scroll and like, okay, the whole world is desolate. No one can do anything. But then there's the Lamb that was slain. He can do it all. So it's sort of about. It's just the courtroom. This is the scene of the courtroom where it's about God's about to
Get
give it
ready
to
to happen.
Christ and say, "It's yours. Do your thing."
The hope is He's coming back for us.
Absolutely.
So,
I like it.
just so you guys know,
I do too.
we're now going into the deeper end of the pool, so to speak. And while we'll be able to understand a lot of different things that we get into using the Old Testament to interpret, there's going to be things that we just don't quite get. And
Absolutely.
we're going to speculate
Absolutely.
and everything. So, But as humans, in our brains, we, especially if you're an engineer like Brent, you want to know how it works, what that means exactly. And,
And God's opening up this right now, you know?
yeah, I mean, God, and I think God's helping those with wisdom who are seeking Him and seeking in Him in His Word to understanding. These things are being unsealed so that we can understand these things now in these last days, which I believe these are the last days.
I know.
So we are just about out of time. Kent, would you mind praying for us?
Absolutely.
We'll dismiss.
Father, we just